Yeah.
I'm going to keep whatever tactic I have to use. I'm going to get there. And this is, you know, at the heart of character disturbance, and this is why, even narcissism these days as a dimension of personality, it's the diagnosis du jour, and
Yes.
everybody's become an expert on it.
Yeah.
Well, the personalities that we're having the biggest problem with these days are the aggressive personalities. And yes, narcissism is a dominant and core features of their personality, but their pathology goes way beyond their narcissism. Because your garden variety narcissist doesn't even care about you, let alone need you. It's another thing to want to get the better of you, to dominate you, to control you, to use you, to exploit you. And these are the aggressive personalities of whom narcissism is a huge part of their character, but they're way more disordered than that. So even though everybody now has become an expert on narcissism and they will tell you that a narcissist is this or that, they're still kind of missing the point, because at the heart of this pathology, the heart of the pathology of these aggressive personalities is the abhorrence, and I'm using that word very carefully because I'm a stickler for words, is the internal abhorrence of subordination.
All right, and welcome everybody. Welcome to Lane and Laney, all the things with Lane and Laney.
Maybe one day I'll get it right.
Maybe one day. Today we have a very special guest. He is a best-selling author of books that include In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, The Judas Syndrome, Why Good People Do Awful Things, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, and How Did We End Up Here? Surviving and Thriving in a Character Disordered World. Such interesting subject matter that we can't wait to pick his brain on and see how he picked the brain of countless others' brains or others to earn his accreditation and reputation. He holds a PhD in clinical psychology and is an expert on narcissistic personalities, manipulators, and those that what we would call defined as having disturbance in character. He's been a contributing expert on CNN, Fox News, Laney's favorite 48 Hours Mystery. So we can't say enough to his wisdom and his insight on the subject of disturbed behavior. So please welcome to the podcast, Dr. George Simon.
Happy to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for being here. We're excited.
I'll say, firstly, what drew you to psychiatry, and more importantly, why did you choose to pursue the dark side, if you will, of human behavior?
Oh my. Yeah, what drew me to the dark side? Well, two things. First of all, clinical psychology was attractive to me because even though I respect the need for certain medications, especially with certain disturbances, mental disorders, and their benefit. Too many times, I think we rely on medicines alone to address problems. And mental disturbances, behavioral disturbances fall into many different categories. And most of the disturbances that we tackle these days have a lot to do with the ways we learn to cope and how we've processed any trauma in our history. And so I was attracted to the field in general because it gave me the opportunity to address the whole person.
Okay.
And how I got drawn to the dark side, I was seeing a lot of folks who were at the tail end of a toxic relationship. And they showed some typical syndromes. And what led me to write my first book was the fact that so many of them were showing the phenomenon we commonly now call gaslighting. We didn't have a term for it then. These people were telling me pretty universally how crazy they felt because they just knew that there was something just not quite right about the person that they were involved with and their behavior, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And worse than that, when they did put their finger on it, or when they tried to call them out, the person was so skilled at manipulation tactics that they ended up feeling like they were misguided in some way, or that they were wrong for thinking what they were thinking. And this made them feel crazy.
Yeah.
So I started to write about it, and I started to do some case study research about it. And that's how the first book was born. And in describing that crazy making behavior long before we had a name for it, just in describing it in the introduction of the book began to sell like hotcakes because
So
what I
relatable.
found out is there are a lot of people out there experiencing this.
Yeah.
And so at any rate, now we have a name for the behavior. And then the other thing that happened is that as I started to work with people with character disturbances, I learned two things. I learned that, number one, it's a spectrum phenomenon, much like we know about other disorders these days. So it varies as to how severe the disturbance is and what its nature is and how treatable it is. And then the second thing I learned, and this is perhaps the biggest thing and why I have done so many workshops over my career, is that it's not as hopeless as clinicians will tell you.
Oh.
There are cases that are beyond our present ability to address. There's no question about that. But the biggest single problem is that most clinicians of any persuasion, whether they're in social work, clinical psychology, psychiatry, professional counseling, doesn't matter, they are totally in the dark about the methods that are necessary to deal with the problem. Because all the things that we're trained to do were devised for treating a whole different population.
Oh, wow.
And so I in my workshop, I say it's analogous to a brain surgeon trying to do that kind of delicate surgery with the same kind of appliances that a dentist uses.
Wow.
I mean, those tools that the dentist has are very valuable tools, but they're not meant for brain surgery.
Right.
So the fact is that these tools and these methods that we're trained, generally speaking, to help people with their problems are fine, but they have absolutely no relevance to character dysfunction. And that's the biggest single reason why you don't make any progress in dealing with these folks generally.
So do you find in these common practices then that the most common practice is then that they prescribe a prescription? Here, take this drug. This will block the neuroreceptors that are responsible for whatever you're feeling, and that's it.
Yeah, well, when it comes to character disturbance, we have some medicines that can really help. For example, for folks who have big problems with impulse control, the mood stabilizing medicines really do help.
Okay.
Does it really address some of the underlying distorted ways of thinking that predispose some problematic behaviors? No. So a whole different approach is necessary. And in large measure, the talk therapy meant for individuals who have a decent sort of conscience and who are generally pretty decent people, but are struggling with fears and anxieties that they don't even understand, and insecurities that they barely explored. For those folks, the talk therapy that we commonly call insight-oriented therapy is just absolutely wonderful. But it's a waste of time when you're dealing with someone with a character disturbance. It's a waste of time. In my workshops, I tell clinicians over and over again, I plead with them, actually, it's not, you're going to waste an awful lot of time and energy trying to get people to see. This is how we delude ourselves as clinicians. We think, we get really deluded sometimes, get even grandiose. We think we're going to be that person who tells this other person who has been doing it a certain way their whole life. And even though it causes a whole bunch of trouble, they don't mind it because they're used to it. They like it, and it seems to work for them.
Sure.
Right.
So you're going to waste an awful lot of time and energy grandiosely thinking you're going to be that person that puts it to them just so, in just a way that they're going to say, oh my goodness, I never looked at it that way before.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just going to change my whole life now. This is just fantasy. It never happens. And so I have a little rhyming phrase that I teach clinicians in the workshops. I say, it's not that they don't see. It's not that they don't see. As a matter of fact, there's nothing you can tell them that they haven't been told 20,000 times before. They see just fine. The problem is they disagree.
Yeah.
It's a little rhyming phrase. It's not that they don't see.
They just
Their spouses told them, their friends have told them, their bosses told them, everybody's told them. They get it.
Yeah.
They still are at odds with what you're asking them to do. And we could get into that later. There's a lot of reasons why they're still at odds, but the bigger problem is that they disagree. And the other thing that I tell them, it's another little rhyming phrase, is it's not so much that they're unaware. The bigger problem is they don't care.
Yeah.
They don't have enough empathy. They don't have enough of the characteristics that non-character disturbed folks have that motivates them to change their ways. So, these are the things that I spend a whole lot of time talking about in relationships, or in my workshops about relationships, and that I hope take root in the seminars. At least they appear to.
That's good.
I say, what are the workshops that you provide? Is it something that you do at a college or?
No, I've done freestanding workshops through many different professional workshop coordinators. COVID pretty much put an end to that last year. And I'm not sure that I will resume live workshops. I've done hundreds of them over the years. Right now, I'm focusing attention on what will probably be my last book.
Okay.
And I think that's going to be my last big attempt to maybe help educate and do my part in healing a problem that's gone on way too long now with and has been too inadequately addressed.
Let's say,
As I say in the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It just sounds like you've already stated that the methods have just been on a constant cycle of this is the way you deal with this. This is the way you deal with this. And no one's come in with any side ideas and said, like you said earlier, that's not the way you deal with these type of people and this type of disturbance of the mind.
Right.
So do you feel like you're just kind of beating your head against a wall here?
No, as a matter of fact, I did feel that way early on. I'll tell you that when I first started doing workshops, almost 32 years ago, when I first started doing workshops, a lot of people in the front rows, I could see them shaking their heads,
Oh, wow.
thinking this poor guy, he's just a little misguided. He thinks he knows something, but he doesn't. Some people even walked out.
Oh, wow.
Really?
That hasn't happened for years. All of a sudden, I've become kind of a genius. I was a real idiot to start with. And now I'm a lot smarter. Now, I haven't changed my script, but times have changed. And I think we've realized a few things,
Well, that's good.
So it's a whole different reception now. Yeah.
That's positive. So do you Can you describe, I'm sure you could go on and on, but what is disturbed behavior, disturbed character?
Okay.
Someone that doesn't really understand.
This is a gross oversimplification, but
Yeah.
basically there are two groups of people. There are those folks who care too much, who are overly conscientious, who beat themselves up over the slightest mistakes and whatnot, because they care a lot.
Yeah.
They have a big fat conscience, a high moral sense, and they drive themselves actually kind of a little.
Crazy.
They don't drive themselves crazy, but they end up worrying too much, being too anxious. They're insecure a lot, and these are the folks who, in Freud's day, you have to remember the time, the cultural zeitgeist of the times. It was the Victorian era. And I say in my workshops, if there were a motto or a slogan that would describe the zeitgeist or the cultural climate of the times, it would be, don't even think about it.
Okay.
That was the atmosphere. So you had a lot of neurotic individuals with big fat consciences who cared a whole lot, who were distraught over the slightest missteps. And they literally made themselves sick.
Yeah.
Really sick, with bizarre symptoms because they were so overly anxious. These are the folks that were treated, and all the major theories were founded on.
Oh,
Okay.
So that's one group of people.
Right.
okay.
The other group are the folks who don't care enough. They don't have enough conscience. They don't get upset. They do things that hurt people and it doesn't bother them. They do things that invite negative consequences, but so long as they seem to profit in some way, they don't care. So it's an entirely different group of people. And everything about what we've learned to help people is different when you compare those two groups. So in my workshops, that's all I focus on with clinicians. I say, look, these two groups of people are so different, and on these 20 or 30 dimensions, radically different. So why in the world would you suspect that the same way of intervening would work when they're so different?
Yeah,
Doesn't make
absolutely.
sense.
It doesn't make any logical sense, but first you have to think about it.
Right.
We wanted to put all folks in one category because we wanted desperately to have some very generalizable rules
Sure.
about why people do the things that they do. And we thought we had them. We thought we had a one-size-fits-all kind of explanation for people and what makes them tick, but we don't.
No.
And it was vanity to think we did. And so as soon as I got that, everything became easier. As soon as the most incredible thing has happened. I've always gotten tons of mail, tons of accolade from people who've been in bad relationships who write me to say, your book was an eye opener, whatever book it was, it's changed my life, blah, blah. That's really nice. But what's happened in recent years is that people around the age of 40, 50, 60, even 70, who've been used to doing things certain maladaptive ways and have not been the best of characters, have finally had an epiphany of sorts. Maybe their fourth marriage has gone south. Maybe they've messed up their umpteenth career. Maybe they've lost all good, decent relationship with their children. Whatever the case may be, it's finally dawned on them, maybe, just maybe, the way I've been doing things all this time just isn't working as well as I thought. Now what the heck do I do?
Yeah.
Right?
You've had people actually come to you and
Absolutely.
ask for help.
And it's happening more and more. And I couldn't be, I'm writing in the introduction to this new book. This is the career of a lifetime. I've gotten to help two very different groups of people. one set of folks is very grateful that I helped rescue them from a horrible situation. And the other group is grateful that when they finally came to a place in their life where they actually thought about becoming a better person, that there was a way to do it. They were overjoyed to think that there was a way. Because most of these folks have been drug into therapy before.
Sure.
Pointless.
Sure.
Pointless. I'll give you a typical mischaracterization. Let's say, for example, you have a character disturbed person on the narcissistic spectrum who loves the thrill, loves the chase, craves novelty, and regards it as a badge of honor when they can make another conquest. And say they go from one exploitative relationship to the next, right?
We've all known those people, yes.
We know those people, right? And then a traditionally minded therapist says, well, this must be rooted in your fear of intimacy.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
I'm serious. These are common because within that orientation, some folks can't imagine why else a person would do it.
Right.
Okay.
You know, we want this one size fits all explanation for human beings. And we're much more complicated than that. We're much more complex. There's a lot of variability out there. It's part of what makes life, you know.
Is that partly why, as somebody who's been in a lot of those relationships with those type of people, present company excluded, but is that why, for me being on the other end, I start to feel sorry for that person?
Absolutely.
Because I feel like, well, something must have happened to make them act this way.
That was drilled into you.
Yeah,
Something must have happened, right?
sure.
And they developed this fear, and they're probably unaware of it.
Right.
So if we could just figure out what that something is,
Yeah.
because this is the framework. This is the dominant psychology framework. We were told it over and over again for years. It's kind of like the big lie.
Yeah.
It's not that it's, and see, the problem is it's not that it's a lie. It does apply to a group of people. But here's the big reality. That group of people has been shrinking in proportion since the days of Sigmund Freud. And now it represents a very small minority that's holding up most of society.
Well, that's an interesting statement, considering that the both of us you described earlier as the overthinking, overcaring, worry ourselves sick over everything that really doesn't apply to us, but we still pull it in and make it applicable to us.
Right.
Yeah.
So
these are the pillars of society today, and they're a shrinking minority.
Okay.
They're a shrinking minority. This is why we're having all the problems that we're having.
So what do you feel the contributing factors are to that? Do you feel it's a attention deficit disorder? Do you feel like there are more traumas in people's childhoods that bring them up? I mean, here I am looking for
yes.
Here I am
all
looking
kinds
for
of factors. But, you know, as they say in all the 12 steps groups, the very first step is acknowledging exactly what the problem is. Okay. And the big problem today, the overriding problem today, is character. And the fact that we don't afford it the level of importance that we have traditionally afforded it. We barely even understand it. We barely even understand all of the things that help, that from a cultural perspective have contributed to the decline in character. And it's a vicious cycle. As more and more character impaired people become the dominant subset of the population, various institutions, norms, codes of conduct erode. And as those erode, more and more character disturbed people enter the population. It's a classic vicious cycle. And it won't turn around until we first label the problem. I dare you to name a social problem that I can't link back to character and the character crisis that we.
I totally.
I dare
totally
you.
agree with you. Yeah, I totally, firmly agree with you. I think it all.
So the point is, we have to. That's the first step.
Okay.
Acknowledge accurately what the problem is. The second step is coming to believe that we can do something about it. And the third is pivotal, and that is turning ourselves over to what we need to do. I don't know how familiar you are with the 12 steps, but there's a great psychology in them. But the first one is, you know, you're not going to even remotely touch a problem until you've correctly identified it.
Right.
And this is it. That's why in my book, Character Disturbance, the subtitle is The Phenomenon of Our Age. This is why we're here.
But these people, you know, according to you, they don't even believe they have a problem most of the time.
Most of them, it's, you know, it's not a matter of that. Like I said, it's not that they don't see.
They just don't care.
Conscientious people have told them over and over again what they'd like them to change. So it's not that they're clueless.
Okay.
And it's not that they see that they don't have a problem. They don't, not only don't they regard it as a problem, but many who have narcissistic tendencies wear their way of doing things as kind of a badge of honor, and also as an indication of their superiority.
Yeah.
To them, you who have scruples, you who have qualms and whatnot, you're just a loser. You're just, I mean, you're not going to get rich that way.
Right.
Right.
You're not going to have power that way. Loser. That's the way they see it.
Yeah.
So, and so many things in our culture reinforce that. Reinforce that loser image with the conscientious, and the winner image with the heartless.
Yeah, say the heartless, the people that are just willing to die and kill people to do whatever they need to do in order to stack upon their fame and their other notoriety and things like that. Is there a common place in society for those people, whether it's the business world?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, that's all I can see.
Just look at what we've been through, and I'm not going to get political about this because I have a number of friends that I consider to be fairly decent people who have felt unheard for years because no one would champion their causes that they believe strongly in.
Sure.
So somebody comes along with the sincerity of a postage stamp, but champions those causes.
Yeah.
Sure.
For the power and the prestige. And I'm not sure that it's that folks don't see it and how ugly that is, because they're desperate.
Yeah.
They're desperate for the champion. So there's always a place for an opportunist. You don't have to have character to have a place. But that's why we're in the shape we're in. We're in the shape we're in because you don't have to have character anymore to have a place. Wouldn't it be something if you could champion all the right causes and you had character besides? If you really cared, it might actually influence your decision-making in a different way.
I say I kind of vaguely think I know where you're going with that, as far as political things and like that. So I view all politicians, almost all government people, all lawyers, people that have to win at all costs.
Win at all costs. It's the way that our system is set up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I view all of those people that way, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independent.
It's a
Whatever.
spectrum phenomenon. It varies as to type and degree. So, yes, the rabid power seekers among us tend to be, generally speaking, of a certain type, a certain problem. But it's also a matter of degree. And we've just been through something I never thought we'd see, ever. And it's not just that it happened, but it became so normalized so quickly, and there was such a lack of outrage about it that, in my opinion, it has to get catastrophically worse before it gets better.
I believe it, and I think for the sake of the show and for the sake of just my curiosity, I think you're talking about voting, if that's any indication of what I think you're talking about. And I strongly believe in that as well. But we have like a thing on this show that we don't get into politics. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's
we'll-
why I was very careful with my
sure,
words. Yeah.
Sure, that was very good. You were tiptoeing around it, but you know, we'll move on.
You can't take the character issue out of anything, because it all comes down to, like I said, I just just name a social issue and I will bring it right back to character.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
It does. So I want to ask you, would you say the work that you've done and do is more to empower and enlighten those who are suffering?
Absolutely.
Because they have to interact with someone with a personality disorder,
You're right.
or is it more to diagnose those with the personality disorder or to help them?
That's really a waste of time to understand. I really want to empower people. We need to move on. We've been in this crisis now for a while, and like I said, some things have become so normalized that things that would have just outraged everybody
Yes.
Yeah.
don't outrage anybody anymore. So we're even beyond outrage. And so my sole purpose is to empower, and in that process also hopefully make a little bit of a dent. When conscientious people get a little bit of power back, I think it will help turn things around. I think this is happening. I've just joined an international corporate consulting group. Why? Because it's important for the people who do have power to maybe have some degree of a change of heart, because they have the power and they have ability to make changes. I never thought that I would gravitate toward those circles, because my efforts have been more grassroots.
Yeah.
But I really do believe in changing hearts one at a time, beginning with our own. And I've spent most of my career working on my own, recognizing those things in myself that I preach about, and finding a way to have that heart-to-heart conversation with somebody else that might actually at least begin the process of internal conversion.
I think that's the way to change things and turn things around, is by empowering those of us that have good character, and that, to change the people around us that don't, so to speak.
Yeah. And you have to have the humility to know that, and I really believe this, one of the reasons I've been laboring on this rewrite, seemingly endless rewrite of this last book, is that this book is less about something that I came to understand. It was a real gift to me that when I wrote my first book, that I had discovered this effect that we didn't even have a name for, and discovered how this effect was produced in people with these tactics that good impression managers and manipulators use. So it was a nice gift, this insight, and I felt compelled to put it out there. But the fact is that insight was granted me. It was a gift from the people that I was working with.
Yeah.
And it was also a gift of the intuition that nature endowed me with to process that and make something of it that resonated. And so this time I am more committed than ever to speak the truth that I know that more flows through me that as opposed to comes from me.
Okay.
Okay.
It's important for me to know that every single word on the page represents something way bigger than me.
So
This
do
is
you-
not my book.
right, right. So
Okay.
that you feel like the intuition, would you say you suppressed that the most of your life, and you just started saying,
You know, I was this is interesting. I was both kind of amazed by it, but also entrusting of it. I've always been an intuitive sort,
Okay.
but I thought, how can this be legitimate? How come other people have studied all this stuff and written all these papers and been published in all these fancy journal? How do I vainly assert that this thing that I think I see is real?
Yeah.
When all these other people with all these credentials are saying, no. So I didn't trust it. It's great to get some validation, and I've gotten plenty of that these days. You know, it's nice to hear some people say, you know, you were right all along. But honestly, I know it wasn't me. There was something inwardly that was speaking and saying, you know what, despite what you're seeing here and despite what you're hearing here, this is the reality. And somehow deep inside of you, you know it. And as soon as I started to trust that, things really started to change.
That's awesome.
I also trust that we're on the cusp of something. The birthing pains are not going to be pleasant, but we cannot keep doing as we have been doing.
No.
There are too many of us in the world. We have pushed the environment to the brink. We have become too used to the creature comforts that we carved for ourselves. And so we can't, it's unsustainable. A lot of things have become unsustainable, so they have to change. Now, whenever those kinds of epochs are among us, or are at our doorstep in human history, the change has not come without a whole heck of a lot of pain and turmoil.
Yeah.
So I know it's going to be rough, but I also sincerely know in the deepest recesses of my soul that we're on the cusp of something. People are waking up all over the place. People like you, I can see it in your eyes, just as we're engaging right here. People are waking up. They know some things have to change. And they're willing to be a part of it if they can, to the best that they know how to be at any given point in time. And that's how it will all change, one heart at a time. It's not going to be some kind of monumental revolution. It's not going to happen like that. It's not going to happen overnight. And there's going to be a lot of strife in between.
Yeah, I can see that. I firmly believe that as well. I don't think we can continue going on the way that we are. I think those that manipulate and control things, that's the reason why we had you on, because it's so prevalent nowadays that people are just out for themselves, out to say, look at me, I'm on Instagram. Look at me, I'm the president of the United States. Look at me, I'm the director of this. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I think that goes hand in hand with the I must win at all costs. Not so much maybe a little bit of the attention deficit disorder because we have so many things coming into us, news media and people around you, the way they think, and you're conflicting with the way that you think.
Right.
And, that goes back to character.
Right. Yeah. So you can edit this out, but I've been looking at your shirt, your Buckeye shirt.
Yeah.
And I spent most of my raising years in Ann Arbor,
Yes, you did.
Oh,
but I have to tell you this is a funny story. I did a workshop in Columbus, and it was the best workshop in terms of receptivity that I can remember. I mean, I get a lot of great receptivity, but we made a joke about that, about the fact that I was in enemy territory and I had the best reception ever.
Well, yeah, sure. There's a lot of smart people in Ohio. Did you know that? Yeah. So when did you move out of Michigan?
Well, I got tired of the winters. I probably suffered seasonal affective disorder for a long time. And in Michigan and Ohio in the wintertime,
yes.
The sun goes away, those awful gray days. That's what
It's difficult.
Yeah. And so I moved to Arizona for a while where I could see blue sky and, see mountains 60 miles away, in the clear air and like that. Then it got to be polluted. It got to be polluted and a mess, and I needed a new career. So I went to a graduate school at Texas Tech, and that's where I met my wife. And we came to Little Rock, Arkansas, an internship, and fell in love with the place. We thought, well, we'll stay here a year. We'll get our internship under our belt, and then we'll go someplace really great and build our careers. But we absolutely fell in love with it here, and we've been here ever since. And besides, the world is a lot smaller now as far as your ability to travel and go places and network via the internet and all like that. So this is a fantastic home base for me.
That's great.
Yeah,
that is pretty good. So because we both dealt with narcissistic personalities and passive aggressive, can you put or split a definition between a narcissist and a passive aggressive person?
Yeah. And by the way, I'm afraid I have to give a critique here, because the term passive aggressive is the single most misused term in all of psychology.
Really?
All right.
It is more egregiously used. I understand why in common parlance it's misused. There was absolutely no excuse for clinicians to misuse the term as often as they misused it. But clinicians so misused the terms that a while back, we have this Bible, this official classification book, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatry Association, that lists all of the different conditions and behavioral health disorders and all like that. And one of the editions a few years back, there was such complete misunderstanding of the term and of the personality type that they just threw it out. They threw up their hands and said, we're not even sure if this exists.
Really?
And that is solely because of the consistent misuse of the term.
Wow.
Passive means just what the word suggests. It means something that is not done.
Oh.
Active is when something is actively done. It's kind of like a passive filter on your refrigerator for water. There are active filters where there's actually a machine inside that does things actively to take ions out of the molecules.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a passive filter that just sits there and lets the water come through.
Okay.
Passive aggressive behavior and passive aggressive personalities don't actively do anything covertly or sneakily or underhandedly to bother you. It's what they don't do that has a slightly aggressive character to it.
Sure.
Like when they won't talk for days, or when they don't talk for days. Even won't implies a more active kind of dimension,
Right.
but they don't. They just get sullen, or they not so accidentally keep forgetting to do the things that you're asking them over and over to
Sure.
do, right?
Yeah.
That's passive aggressive behavior. And passive aggressive personality types are a very different personality type. So I wrote my first book on the covert aggressive personality. And now the term covert narcissism is being used to describe the same personality. There's nothing covert about narcissism.
No, that's pretty out there.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. I mean, we are, as a group of scientists, we play more fast and loose with terms than anybody.
Okay.
And we barely even know what the terms mean anymore. So I'm real meticulous about it. I got to say, this is my neuroticism. This is where I get really picky and over conscientious.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in other spheres of like medicine, if the lab report comes back and says squamous cell carcinoma versus basal cell carcinoma, these labels mean things.
Right.
They not only mean very different things, but they have massive implications for what you do next. So correctly labeling has a lot to do with what you do afterward in the way of intervention.
That makes
And
sense.
so I'm a stickler.
Yeah.
And most of the time when we say passive aggressive, what we are really talking about is covertly aggressive behavior. This is a very active versus passive attempt to control, dominate, manipulate another person, but carried out in stealthy ways on purpose, because that's a more effective strategy than just being obvious about it.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay. So
So
outside.
that's my very loving way of saying, don't use passive aggressive when you
Oh,
mean
sure.
aggressive.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm not in the know.
Getting your education.
Yeah, we're all about enlightenment here. So you can enlighten us. That's fantastic. But
Yeah.
no, we've had, I'm sure, I feel like it's the norm. I feel like nowadays
Yes.
people try to, well, I'm just going to say this under my breath and maybe you'll catch it. And yeah, I hope you catch it. If not, I'm just going to do something else that's subtle and,
Right.
is
But
there-
I'm going to win.
yeah,
I'm going to keep whatever tactic I have to use. I'm going to get there. And this is, you know, at the heart of character disturbance. And this is why, you know, even narcissism these days as a dimension of personality, it's the diagnosis du jour.
yes.
Everybody's become an expert on it.
Yeah.
Well, the personalities that we're having the biggest problem with these days are the aggressive personalities. And yes, narcissism is a dominant and core features of their personality, but their pathology goes way beyond their narcissism. Because your garden variety narcissist doesn't even care about you, let alone need you. It's another thing to want to get the better of you, to dominate you, to control you, to use you, to exploit you. And these are the aggressive personalities of whom, you know, narcissism is a huge part of their character, but they're way more disordered than that. So even though everybody now has become an expert on narcissism and they will tell you that a narcissist is this or that, they're still kind of missing the point, because at the heart of this pathology, the heart of the pathology of these aggressive personalities is the abhorrence, and I'm using that word very carefully because you know I'm a stickler for words, is the internal abhorrence of subordination.
Okay.
They hate to put themselves at the surface of something bigger. It's not that they fear it. I'm being careful with the words. It's that they detest it. And why? because the narcissism in their character has them thinking that they're all important, that their wants and desires are all important, that their opinion is all important, and they recognize no higher power. And even if they did entertain the thought that there was something bigger to serve, they don't have the heart to want to serve that something bigger. And this is the heart of the pathology of our times. This is the heart of the pathology of our times. It's not that the something bigger hasn't always been there. All of us have to reckon with the realization at some point that we didn't cause all this,
Right.
that we didn't bring all this into existence. There's something way, way, way bigger out there that we pale in comparison to. But respect for that is at an all-time low. And that has its roots in the narcissism. But it goes beyond the narcissism. Because when you then have the willingness to go for power for its own sake and abuse and exploit just to aggrandize yourself and to leave absolute messes in your wake, and you don't care what damage you do just so that you're aggrandized, you go way beyond narcissism. And that's these folks that I describe in my books as the aggressive personalities, and there's 5 subtypes I describe. This is the phenomenon of our age. And there's nothing passive about these people.
Sure.
There may be some covert aspects to their aggression, but ain't nothing passive about them.
I'll say, is there, what was my question on? What is the point of a narcissist even getting in a relationship? Is it just to dominate? Is it just to, let's see how I can put damage on this person and I can, like you
It
said,
can be, because after all, if I can dominate, that's a testament. It affirms my greatness. Okay. Sometimes it's just a matter of possession. You know, one of the reasons I've been spending so much time on this last book, and you know, at some point I would really love it if we'd have, because it's to my benefit to have continuing conversations about the foundation of this last book, which are what I call the 10 Commandments of Character that I briefly outlined in my book, Character Disturbance. A lot of attention used to be devoted in child rearing to fashioning character because of its importance. And I know that a lot of people will criticize me and say, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. We've always had no goodness. We've always had, you know, things that were going on behind the scenes that were, you know, we've always been broken people. That's true. But there actually were times that deals could be confidently closed on a handshake.
Yeah.
There actually were times when it mattered enough to a sports team that you be as solid in character as you were talented, because you could have all the talent in the world, but if you might run the risk of bringing discredit or dishonor to the team, you weren't being invited to participate.
Yeah.
There were those times. I know there were those times.
Oh yeah.
And there were statistics that went along with that showed that there was a different sense of the importance of character in people's minds and how much it meant. And we're paying the price for degrading that.
So what do you think
weighting that as heavily?
What's changed? Is it, you know, how parents are raising their kids? Or is it starting there?
And how society is not supporting the effort. You know, it was not uncommon at one point for the rules to be so universally understood that it didn't matter whose house you were at or whose parents were intervening with you as a child.
Right.
Yeah.
These days, parents disagree with each other. They'll even come to school and bawl out the teachers for daring to
Absolutely.
impose some
Yeah.
discipline on their kid.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's ridiculous.
One of the problems is that we've gone so far into left field that we don't know how far we've come.
Yeah.
We've incrementally, insidiously, slowly, we've gone so far afield that we don't realize how lost we've become. And that has to change, and it will change. It has to change. For us to make it, this course is unsustainable, as I said before.
Yeah.
So I've been laboring over this book, and I've been laboring particularly over all those factors that contribute to learning these important lessons, overcoming our natural egocentricity, having an appreciation for something bigger, and then eventually developing the heart to serve that something bigger instead of just our own interest. Now, we have to take care of ourselves. Some people, their pathology is defined by the fact they don't take good enough care of themselves. So, it's all a matter of balance. But the bigger pathology in today's time is we have too many folks who, if they do recognize a higher power, so to speak, or a bigger entity, they don't want to serve it. They don't have the heart to serve it. They just want to serve their own self-interest. Because after all, this life is short, it's temporary, there's nothing after it as they see it. So might as well get mine and get all I can get and have as good a time as I can in the process. And if you have to be one of those people that I use and abuse along the way, well,
Be it.
that's your problem because you were dumb enough to let me do it.
Yeah.
So going along with the idea of, I know you touched on it earlier, that these people need to first recognize that they've got an issue, that they've got a narcissistic trait, or they behave.
Well, they know they've got an issue.
Right.
They know they have enough people have told them enough times, they know there's an issue. Now, how they regard that issue, if they're still regarding it as just an indication of their greatness and superiority over you, then they're not going to do anything about that issue. But they know the issue is there. It's how they regard it. And they can't regard it differently without some sense of something bigger than them. And that's the dilemma for the narcissist. They can't even imagine anything bigger.
And so going to the origin of it all, whether it be a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath, is it the trauma related to when they were younger? Are they?
It can be.
Okay.
It can be. But to assume so is folly.
Sure.
And besides which, it doesn't matter because you haven't the power to undo that.
Or understand it.
And it doesn't matter. What matters is doing differently. See, here's another thing I stress in workshops, and I'll give you a perfect example of it in a minute. We have known for many, many years, and I'm a big proponent of the cognitive behavioral model. We have known that the ways we think about things, our attitudes toward things, influence our behavior and also even influence our feelings. So if I think, I'll just use attitudes towards women as an example. If I think that a woman's place is to be subordinate, that she's not really equal to me, that it's okay if I lord power and authority, and that if I think that that's just the way it's meant to be. If that's my thinking, then I'm going to behave in a relationship accordingly.
Sure.
And here's what most therapists and people in general do. They try to reason with people that that's not a great way to think. I am telling you with certainty, this is a complete waste of time, breath, and energy. A complete waste. We have known that if people would think differently, they would act differently, but we have had the paradigm backwards as to how to accomplish the task. It is a lot more efficacious, that's a fancy word for effective, And it's actually a lot simpler to act your way into a new way of thinking and feeling than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. At a moral development, stage, most of these character impaired folks are stuck at about age 4 or 5. You ever tried to reason with a 4 or 5-year-old?
Yeah,
Daily.
daily.
Yeah.
It's pretty
How's that
stupid.
working for you?
It's not.
How they learn is through experience. How they learn is when life teaches them lessons. You have to start doing things differently and experiencing the different results, and then the light bulb goes off. Okay? So I give the example I give in workshops at the home that we sold recently, but that we lived in for a number of years. We had a pool in our backyard. And one year for Christmas, we decided to get both my grandkids lessons so that they would learn how to swim and dive appropriately. Well, they're different in temperament. My granddaughter, Ella, she's a little bit more daring than Noah was. He was a little more cautious. And when it came time to learning to dive, there was just no way he was going toward that deep end of the pool, because he just knew, in his little brain, he just knew that if he went into that deep water, he probably wasn't coming out. You know, he just knew it.
Yeah.
Now, he was 4, and so like any misguided parent, and just like some misguided therapists do, we tried reasoning. We tried convincing. Don't you see that your uncle, he dives in, he comes out just fine. Your sister, she'll even go in, she comes out just fine. Noah, I know that I'm going to be just the one that doesn't survive this,
Wow.
right? But what he would do is he would go in the shallow end. Sometimes he would allow some horseplay in there. Sometimes in the horseplay, he'd bob under the water just a little bit. He'd have to learn a little breath control. He eventually developed the nerve to be jumping off the steps in the shallow end, to waiting arms to catch him just in case, you know. Gradually, over time, he built some skills and he learned some things. And one day, his entire mentality changed. Now, I don't know if you are of any faith persuasion, but in the faith that I have become more ardent about, our teacher told us there's only one thing to do. Just leave you with one command, and that's to do the loving. Matter of fact, do it in the kind of manner that I have demonstrated, to the mat, even willing to sacrifice your very life. Do that. It will change your mentality. It will change your outlook. It will change your heart. It will change everything. So if you'll excuse me, psychologists, social workers, physicians, psychiatrists, professional counselors, we've had it backwards for a long time. We sit there and we waste breath, time, and energy trying to get people who are at earlier stages of moral and character development, and we try to reason with them. Don't you see this? Don't you see that? Don't you see that? Please don't waste the time and energy. What I do in encounters is ask people to just try a little something different. And then I heavily reinforce that, because that's how people learn. We can't undo any trauma if trauma was part of how they got where they are. We can't undo their genes or their temperament if most of their problems stem from just the way they're wired. We can't undo anything. But human beings are distinguished among all the other creatures on the planet in their incredible capacity to learn.
Yeah.
And that comes through experience. And if you keep doing things over and over again the same old way, you're going to keep getting the same old results. So what psychiatry and psychology and social work and all the other allied disciplines need to become about is encouraging people to do differently and experience the benefits. Worlds open up to you. Ahas come every day. You don't have to waste time, energy, and breath dealing with people's thoughts or feelings. It's the behavior that counts. And it's baby steps. It's Noah learning to be comfortable with the water, going to the steps first, then going to the ledge, learning how to hold breath, learning all these things that eventually allows him to look at that deep water with an entirely different frame of mind and have the confidence to dive into it with the thought that maybe he just will come out just fine and not perish.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable.
I was gonna say that's kind of what we deal with our 8-year-old. He's very timid in life and kind of timid in most things he tries, and won't try things until he's certain that he can absolutely do them correctly.
Yeah.
So that's
also a waste of time to try too hard to understand. The understanding is nice. In other words, knowing where he is in at his current level of development and having some compassion for the fact that he's not where you'd like him to be just yet.
Yeah.
That's nice. But all the understanding in the world won't either get you or him to a different place.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So we're kind of fluctuating always in our heads thinking, okay, well, I don't want to push him too far. And then, well, he needs to experience this to learn, and he's not willing to do it on his own. So how much do I shove him? And, it's a constant battle with our heads, and it's just something we always worry about and consider.
Yeah, but the willingness in love to endure that battle and to pick up that cross, to bear that burden, that's what defines healthy character. Because there's something bigger than just you or your self-interest at stake. Right. And the big problem with the entire world right now is that so few people are in right relationship with that something bigger. And some people actually detest, and I'm using that word carefully, the whole notion of subordination to something bigger, because for them, it's all about them and their desires, their aspirations, and getting all they can, displaying their greatness in the process. We have a very character sick world. And until we come to grips with what the problem is, it won't get better.
I know, you've touched on this, that it can just be that they're wired differently. I mean, do you have a belief whether it's nature versus nurture? Is it a little both?
Yeah, and I teach about that, but once again, my conclusion is it's all pretty irrelevant.
Right.
In the end,
matter anyway.
Because all we have at this time, all we really have is the ability to learn. We have to trust that. We don't yet have a way to go in and change the genes, right, or the temperament or the brain wiring. And we don't have a way just yet to completely erase the impact of trauma. And I also make the point, I'm making it very big in this upcoming book, that we have always thought that the only thing that can go wrong in the raising of people is trauma that arrests development. Well, that is not the more, that is a more obvious thing that can go wrong, but the more insidious thing, the subtle, almost overlooked thing, is not so much what happens to people, but what doesn't happen. It's the lack of appropriate coaching and training. So many unfortunately, so many young people come into environments where they are totally depraved and deprived. There's nothing there for them. They don't have mentors, they don't have guidance. And then when they get it, it's inappropriate guidance at that.
Mm.
So it's not so much what happens, it's what doesn't happen. Building character takes a lot
Yeah.
in the way of conscientious effort, not just by caretakers, but by the whole society at large. And when we quit paying it any attention to it at all and said, you know, it really doesn't matter. That's why, by the way, my program, my podcast is called Character Matters. It's a play on words. It matters. You know, we talk about matters pertaining to character, but we do it because I think it matters more than anything. And so that's why the name.
Well, that's makes perfect sense. So you had stated that you think that disturbed people are not hopeless. What does it take to bring someone who is
Well, there are folks on the spectrum who I think the way they are put together in our day and time makes it fairly unreasonable that they will learn all the lessons that they need to learn, even when all the circumstances are right, to make major shifts in their character. There are some people at the far, it's kind of like autism. We know that, we now know how wide the spectrum is. We had no idea years ago how wide the spectrum was. So there are folks who are so mildly on the spectrum, they don't even qualify for the diagnosis that we used to call Asperger's syndrome. They're just so very mildly on the spectrum that we know they're a little quirky, but it's hard to even think of them as autistic because there's just a touch.
right.
And those people, if you intervene very early and with the right kinds of intervention, when they enter adulthood, you'd never tell them from anybody else. Then there are people at the very end of the spectrum. It doesn't matter what you do with all the interventions we have today. You give them the best of everything and you give it to them intensely for years and years and years and years. And at the end of it all, they still end up in adulthood, barely able to function. And some need caretakers to function and some need to be in institutions. So there's a continuum there. And it's the same with character disturbance. There are individuals for whom even the methods that I know can work are going to be relatively ineffective. But there are more folks who are at different places on the spectrum where there is hope, but where there is no hope is as if you try to intervene using those methods that don't have a prayer
Right.
of helping, never did have a prayer of helping.
I
But
say,
if that's all the clinician knows, that they're going to stick with that.
Right.
And unfortunately, they're going to experience the results.
well, speaking on clinicians and different ways of changing your field, how does that process work? You get an idea and do you submit it to a board, or is there like this, I'm picturing like a giant dome of psychology. Does it exist, or is it just a bunch of people saying, well, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try that.
Yeah.
Hey, this works. How does a new idea
Yeah.
come into play?
Professors in school said I had a real gift for scientific kind of writing. There's a certain style that if I had the heart to be an egghead, there's a certain style of writing that will get you in any journal you want to get into, especially if you've done the research according to the prescribed way.
Okay.
I long ago I just didn't have the heart for that. And besides which, I used the gift that I was given with my own learning disability. Some people are able to see things, but they're not able to express all that well. So I had to develop the skill early on in my educational life to bring things down to basics, to take the complex and make it as straightforward and as simple and as basically understandable as possible. I had to do this for my own benefit, but I also found it very helpful to the general public. And that's how I've written all my books.
Yeah.
And I also found that it works with people you're trying to train too, because they have already the sophistication. They can put two and two together. They can do all the elaboration. But sometimes when you've missed the forest for the trees, you have to come back to basics, and you have to say, now look, this is a different animal and these are its characteristics. Remember that first, then apply your knowledge.
Sure.
You know, and so that's what I do in my workshops. So early on, I abandoned that whole thing of peer-reviewed articles and just went right straight to the general public and right to the clinicians with my experience and what I was learning as a result of my experience.
So that writing style you spoke of, those people just trying to get notoriety and put it published and all that stuff, is that some of the
Let me tell
psychology
you.
you talked about earlier of just wanting to win and get that notoriety? Or
Let me tell you, I'll just give you an analogy here. Most everything is digital these days. Most everything is digitized. But if you were to go to any library, not just a medical library or anything like that, any library back in the day, the shelves most packed with volumes and volumes and volumes of just abstracts. Now, abstracts are just little snippets, little 1 paragraph or 2 paragraph snippets of these lengthy articles. The abstracts alone in psychology took up more space than anything else in the library. Just the abstracts.
okay.
So that's how much stuff we had the research on. And how much did we 100% solidly know about human beings and their behavior? About that much.
Mhm.
So early on, I decided that was not my cup of tea.
Don't blame me. That sounds like a big meal to digest.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I could have digested all that stuff. I would probably have lost my mind.
Sure.
Yeah. So I have a question. This is just
Sure.
out of basic curiosity, because I have a very weird fascination with serial killers and sociopaths and things of that nature. Is there anybody out there, you know, a famous case of somebody that kind of took you off guard and surprised you because they didn't have the characteristics of a normal character disturbed person?
Oh, well, you know, unfortunately, given the work that I've done, especially the forensic work that I've done, nothing surprises me anymore. But
Yeah.
one of the most exemplary manifestations of all the things that I write about in my book, you can see in the very short snippet. It's available on the internet. Some recordings are better than others. If you want, I can send you the best one that I know of. I can send you a link to it. I use it in my workshops. But you remember the case, do you, of Ariel Castro?
Yes.
Yeah.
That person. This was the Cleveland, actually,
Yeah.
case, right? This is the guy that kept as sex slaves in his basement, chained up these 3 young women
Yes.
that he had abducted as the bus driver in their school. Every single thing that I write about, characteristic of character disturbance, he demonstrates in about 20 minutes as he's making his appeal at sentencing.
Oh,
Really?
wow.
For leniency, yes. Everything from casting himself as the victim
Mhm.
to casting himself as the good guy, people out to get him, people not, things so outrageous that you don't know whether to burst out laughing or crying, as he says that. And you ask yourself, does he really believe these things?
Right. Like how is that even possible that you don't know what you did was wrong?
And the classical explanation for that is that because he necessarily has a conscience, because everybody has a conscience, that was the classical understanding. He has to make himself believe those things unconsciously. He doesn't do it deliberately. He has to be in a state of denial. He has to believe those things because it would be too painful for him. He would experience too much overwhelming anxiety and inner pain if he were to acknowledge the truth. But you will see from his affect, if you watch this, and like I said, if you don't find it, I'll send you a link to the best recording I know of. It's all tactical. He thinks he's making the best case he can to the judge
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
for leniency, but he displays every single thinking error and every single impression management tactic that you can think of. But he does it in such a crude way that it's totally ineffective. Now, if he had the gift of charm, if he had sophistication in his vocabulary, if he had groomed himself, if he had a different persona and image, it might have sold. But poor guy, he just didn't have any of that going for him.
Poor guy,
So,
yeah.
yeah, he just didn't have any of that going.
No, definitely
I was
did.
gonna say, what is the how close are normal people, aka people that walk around and might have a crazy thought of, I'm gonna murder that lady if she cuts me off again or whatever? How close are those people? How many steps away are they from this guy, this sociopath? Or, is it just a life situation could hit them and all of a sudden, boop, light switches
Switch.
on and off they go? In your experience, I mean, how many times diagnosing somebody or listening to somebody talk have you thought, holy cow, they are on the verge?
Okay. So I'll get really frank with you here. I don't just believe that there's a world of potential in all of us,
Sure.
all kinds of potential,
Sure.
good and bad. But I know it firsthand because I've had experiences in my life that were traumatic enough that put me on the edge. I mean, where it was really possible that I could have done some unthinkable things. I mean, truly put me at that edge. So I know that all of that is within us all. And I think we all, at some level, if we've done any kind of meaningful self-introspection or reflection, we know that these things are in us.
Right.
So what keeps us?
Yeah.
What keeps us from going over the edge?
Yeah.
What keeps you?
My life, my family, the love I get from other people, it kind of keeps me from just.
So is it purely selfish? In other words, are you are you too reluctant to give up the good things that you possess, and that's the only thing that motivates you to be decent?
No, I think the social norms also keep me in line. I think I can't take that person's life. That person, even though I hate them right now, they mean something to somebody else. So
Yeah.
Right.
I can't take that away from their children and their family.
Right. So these are the things that do influence all of us
Mhm.
in our character development. And you just labeled them, fortunate enough to experience the joys that come along with living fairly responsibly and gaining the fruits of that, we'd be a fool to risk it. And also, we want to be seen well by the rest of the society and the norms that, especially within the group that if you were a member of a club of sociopaths, you might have a different sentiment.
Sure.
So that's what influences most of us. What's rare, and it only happens in certain speak by grace. In other words, it only happens through the benevolence of the universe, is when you have some kind of intimate contact with, one way or another, with that bigger something that is impossible to even define, let alone give a name to.
So it's that gut feeling, that sixth sense that just kind of, no, don't do that. That little shoulder, the tap on your shoulder that says,
No,
no.
it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. It's the deep realization that as you're breathing, that breath is being powered. And yes, you can exercise your will. You can hold it for a minute. But it's being powered. There's a virtual army at work in you right now. And Einstein said that the amount of nuclear energy, just the atomic forces between the atoms in your fingertip, in just one of your fingertips, that all the energy at work right there, there's all kinds of things. You wouldn't believe what's going on in there. If you could see with an electron microscope, all that's going on in there right now. And you're not even aware of all the other stuff that's happening systemically, just to keep you, as you come to know yourself, going. Einstein said if that all of that energy just in the fingertip were to be released at once, it would be the equivalent of 20 Hiroshima bombs.
Oh. Oh.
There's energy at work granting this all. And the energy is not divided up. It takes different expressions and form, but there is, it's amazed scientists that we're still in the expansion phase of this universe's incarnation. And now we're coming to believe that there were maybe likely other bangs.
Yeah.
Before the inevitable contraction, because there's such a thing as entropy rather. And eventually this outward movement has to reverse and then recondense back into the singularity, and then boom, here we go again. So, the breath rate, if you will, of God is billions and billions of centuries, trillions and trillions of years. And we're still on the first exhale of this incarnation. But there's an energy there at work. And what I'm saying to you, it's nice to have the moral sense that comes from standards and that inner sense of, there is such a thing as right and wrong. It's nice to have that level of moral development. But it's pretty transformative when you, usually by happenstance, get a glimpse of that undefinable something behind it all. And you develop, and you have to stand in awe of it, and you have to think, oh my goodness, something really big is at work here, and I'm a part of it. And then the only question becomes, what kind of part of it do I want to be?
Yeah. The good side or the bad side of things. It's all about belief.
Yeah.
Do you believe you're in a, a hostile universe or a universe that's in your favor? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, probably one last question we've got is, being in a relationship with those type of people for as long as I have, once you finally figure out that that's the type of relationship you're in and that's the type of person you're with, what do you do with that then? I mean, obviously you get out of the relationship most likely, but
Most likely. It
Steps.
depends on where somebody is on the spectrum
Yeah.
and, where they are in their own character development readiness. In the book that I'm writing, I've got several stories of folks that had those moments of transformation. And so I wanted to convey those stories too.
Yeah.
This effort on my part has taken me so long because I know in the pit of my soul that it's time for the message to be out there, but it has to be itself of a certain character to be inviting enough. When I first realized that it was enough, just in the introduction to my first book, to describe this phenomenon we call gaslighting, and that it would appeal to so many people just because they could identify it. In other words, they were looking for something in the first place, or they wouldn't have gone into the bookstore and they wouldn't have been looking through books. And as soon as, right within the opening paragraphs, as soon as I got to that part, and they thought, oh my goodness, maybe this person actually knows what I've been going through,
Somebody understands.
There has to be that same invitation to somebody who picks up this next book. They have to be in a certain state of readiness, but when they read the opening parts, they have to have the same response. They have to say, oh, maybe, just maybe, this is just what I've been looking for. And I'm not saying that to aggrandize myself. I'm saying that to explain why I've labored over this so long. It's important for me to speak the truth that speaks to the heart of people.
So when do you expect your book to come out?
I now can see the end in sight.
Yeah.
I now can. And if I really dedicate myself through it, I think we're within a couple of months as opposed to years away like we
Okay.
were. The book was originally written, actually, about 6 years ago now.
Oh,
I
okay.
had a co-author. My editor from one of my other books is my co-author on one other book, and she was a co-author with this one. And she mined all my material and helped me put it together because she's a great editor. But the flavor and the appeal of the book as originally written was strictly moralistic. It was strictly basically it was a how-to manual for making yourself a better person.
Oh, okay.
And I quickly realized that wasn't going to be enough of a hook. And not only that, I mean, that was from a practical perspective. I didn't want it to be that kind of a book. I didn't want it to be a well-crafted book with a hook in it to maybe attract some people that really needed to make of themselves better people. Rather, I wanted it to be the bigger picture book that led to that aha moment that I think we all need, that helps us all in our own way to do our part toward ushering in this new age. So I wanted it to be bigger, and I've been working to make it bigger, to make it more spiritual, frankly.
Well, I can tell by the way that you speak that you really truly intend for everyone listening and reading your books that you're just trying to help. You're just trying to diagnose this and explain it in the most simplest form, and not just give you a bunch of hoopla and rhetoric and I'm smarter than you are and this is the diagnosis, and try to get too deep into psychology for people. So for anyone who's listening and watching this, I hope you go and read the doctor's books. Sounds like the new one coming out should be read by a certain number of people, and sounds
Its new tentative title is Essentials for the Journey, Embracing and Living the 10 Commandments of Character. That's its new tentative title.
I like that. I like the whole idea that you're behind character. I think, like you said, and I've always preached on it, the basics. Go back to the basics, back to the basics. If you start With the basics, there's your foundation, and you can move on from there. But if you're trying to juggle everything on top of a foundation that sucks, you need to go back and try to figure out the basics first.
Right.
So with that said, we're very appreciative that you've come on our podcast, sir. And
It was a pleasure.
it was a pleasure. It's great to hear the insight.
Thank you.
And
Now, I
if
should have asked you this at the beginning, but once the recording is done and edited, will I have the freedom to put it up on my platforms as well?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We
We'd
would love
appreciate
that.
if you did. Yeah.
Excellent. So you'll
Trying to-
send me the MP4,
Yes. Yep.
the
Just trying to get,
Dropbox or Google Drive or something?
yeah. Yeah. I'll get it
Okay.
to you, and we'll make
Wonderful.
sure that you receive it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
But we appreciate your time. Thanks for going a little earlier with us than
Yes. Sorry
Central
about that.
Standard and all that
You're
stuff.
welcome. And maybe sometime we can talk just about the 10 Commandments of Character.
I would
Yeah.
love that.
Let's say we can have you back on when your new book comes out. That'd be
Matter of
great.
fact, when we get off, I'll send you the link to the, I mean, as awful as it is, you'll find it interesting to see Ariel Castro
Yes, I would like
do
that.
everything in the span of 20 minutes that I describe in my books.
Oh, sure.
But I'll send you that link, and I'll also send you the concise one-page version of the commandments so you can look them
Oh,
over.
okay.
Okay.
Awesome. I
Well,
appreciate that.
Say before we leave, is there anywhere that people can reach you, or you want people to?
The best way is through my blog at www.drgeorgesimon.com. That's DRGEORGESIMON.com. And manipulative-people.com will get you there too, either URL. And there's a page that says contact Dr. Simon. They can contact me either for consultation or for appearances on podcasts just like this, or just to chat. And then of course my books, which are readily available on Amazon and Audible and all like that.
Very good. Well, if you would,
Thank you.
you would kindly stick around for just a few minutes after I hit the record button, I'd talk to you
Okay.
in just a minute. But
Okay.
we thank everybody for
Yes.
your time this time, and until next time.
Thanks, everybody.